Okay, all right. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight because of the fact that this is an opportunity for me, the very first opportunity for me to talk a little bit about what I've learned over the past, this year's 4 years since Bailand passed. And it's been a, no pun intended, uphill battle for a lot of different things. But there's a lot of things that I've learned, and even over the last week, there are certain things that I've learned that I want to share, okay? For those of you who don't know, this is Danielle. She is the one who helped me write the book, and without you, honestly, there's no way this book would be where it's at now, okay? And I'm so grateful. This is the cover of, this is the cover that we have for the book, and I'm so excited because it seems like there are certain things that we have struggled with and then been provided an answer. Wouldn't you agree? Mm-hmm. About just little things. We didn't, before we put the picture of Bailand on there and the font, we just had a picture. And Kirsten showed it to us, and both of us were like, that's it. That's it. And then as she added the other things, it just came to be. Okay? As I've gone through so many things about what to talk about to everybody, not just individuals who, you know, one-on-one or whatever, there's a lot of things that keep coming back to me, and the first one is grief. Okay? Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, first of all, is
Other arrow. The other arrow.
huh? Oh,
Got one more.
that one.
There you go.
I saw this, I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name is grief. Because grief is something that's very interesting for each one of us, because there's so many things that it does to us, it does for us, it helps us to heal, but it helps us to see a bigger picture in a lot of ways because of what it is. That grief cycle is not a round circle. It doesn't just go in a nice little pattern. You never know what's going to happen. So the reason I like this is because of the fact that everybody has a wound. Everyone has something, an experience in their life that they have not dealt with. And so it's either anger or addiction, or it's suicide, or it's depression, anxiety, okay? Now, this is something that I thought a lot about. Because if we look at the distance between the bottom level, so to speak, of grief and the top level of happiness, there are so many different shades, so many different degrees of grief. And I don't care what the loss is. I don't care, it doesn't matter whether it's because of the loss of a pet, the loss of a job, the loss of a dream, the loss of a child, the loss of a loved one of some sort, okay? And sometimes we have to take into consideration whether something's really a loss. For example, somebody loses a job, and they've been grumbling for the last 20 years over this job. All of a sudden, they lose this job, and they don't know what to do. They start grieving, so to speak, over the loss of income or whatever. But we look at this and say, what opportunities do you have? What have you learned over the last 20 years that allow you to start something that you've always wanted to do, that's your passion? Look at what you've learned over the last 20 years. It's not really even a loss, because it allows you to step into your role, to step into your truth, to step into your authenticness, to who you truly are and what you're supposed to do. You've learned, you've had your experience, you've had your education over the last 20 years. So we have to look at this, but there are certain things that we look at, and sometimes we have no idea how to get away from grief, how to deal with it. I know that on this line, I guarantee I was at negative 49 the day that I learned that Bailand had passed. I was not at negative 50 because I was laying on my back face up, not face down. I knew that I had to keep going on. And that was one of the bravest things I ever did, was keep going on when I knew that I didn't want to. I wanted to just be done. So, the thing that I know is that anything from 0 to negative 49, I can sit with somebody. I can understand that I may not understand everything that there is about what they've gone through or what they're going through, but I can sit there with them. There are people who have sat with me through all of this. Now, if we look at that, there are three things that I want to talk about in regards to grief, in regards to how we get through certain things. First one is empathy. Never understood it. Never understood what empathy is and why. Why would anybody want to put themselves in my shoes or anybody else, any other parent's shoes, when you hear the words, "We will now close the casket. We will now proceed to the cemetery." Why would anybody want to feel that? Why would I want to share that pain with them? But what I realize that empathy is it's a human connection. It is a doorway to an understanding of what somebody goes through. It is an interpersonal communication for interpersonal relationships. And it's very emotional. What that means is that if someone looks at me and says, "I can't even imagine, I don't know what I would do. How did you make it through?" They're not asking to feel that pain. They're asking, "What can I do? I'm sorry, I wish I could take that away from you." It's not right that people have to do this. What can I do? What do you need? What do you want? And at that point, they can offer an unlimited amount of compassion, kindness, acceptance, and tolerance of that pain. They can understand why somebody is going through certain things. So empathy in itself is a beautiful segue into other virtues that allow us to be who we truly are. Okay? Now, the second thing I want to talk about, before I do that, I was sent this in a text by a very dear friend, and I talk about a lot how there are certain things that I understand that I can help people through, right? And why would we have to have certain things happen to us, certain wounds that we go through life and deal with? Well, we're given the very wounds that we have to help others heal from and teach them how to heal from that. So we may ask, why do I have to go through this? Is there any other way that we can be taught what this wound is supposed to teach us? Sometimes, yeah, but then we have to go through something again and again and again. And other times it's, no, there is no other way. There's no other way that you can get to this point without going through so much that you think you're not going to make it. And that happens to a lot of us. And so, what I want to talk about, if I have this bell, and every time you see me, Cody, would that drive you crazy if you heard this? Okay? You know why this is one of my favorite bells? Is because it used to drive us crazy with, when my kids would come to my parents' house and they would see this and, oh, it's Grandma's bell. It's Grandma's bell. And we hear this, right? Now, if I walked around and I said, okay, all of a sudden we're starting to get on our nerves a little bit, right? But then all of a sudden, what happens if we get to the point where we don't hear it anymore? Is that better, Cody?
Sounds a lot better.
Okay. Anybody heard of what we call the proverbial bell? Proverbial bell is back in the 1800s-ish. They would ring a bell if there was a fire. And everybody knew that once they heard that bell, they would go running and help with that fire, right? So they would always be hearing or listening for that bell. Well, today, there's lots of people who are ringing bells. This reminds you of in December when you have to put all the change in the bucket, huh, Cody? Or else get change for $1 or whatever you're gonna do, right? So, at some point in time, we see the bell walking around and we don't hear it anymore. It's not because it's not making a sound, it's because of the fact that we are so involved in our own life, in our own self. And Belinda and I, we had a fantastic conversation. And we talked about the proverbial bell and how when people are struggling with different things, how it seems like they're ringing their bell. And Belinda asked, I wonder why people don't do that anymore. And I said, they do, Belinda. Every day. We always are ringing a bell if something. It's the fact of whether or not we're aware of what's going on, especially around us. And so as we hear this proverbial bell, the question I have is, do we hear it around or has it become annoying? And instead of saying, are you doing okay? We ask the question, how are you? If somebody asks me, how are you doing? I will lie through my teeth. I'm good, I'm great. I don't care what's going on. I'm great, never better. If somebody says, are you doing okay? Oh, hell no. Nope. And they just got the opportunity to sit and listen because they gave me permission. Whether I choose to say anything or not, my answer is usually a much more honest answer than it is if somebody asks me, how are you? Because I know that they're just trying to get, they might as well just say hello. I'd much rather them just say hello, But my question also is, do we know what our proverbial bell is? Do we know how to ask for help? And it may not be something like this. It may be something where we're more silent. And people are not aware that we're missing. We go missing. That doesn't mean that we're gone anywhere. But we're not there. And so, too many times, we don't notice the people who have been gone. And we don't know what to do or what to say when they are missing. Now, I'm not saying that this is the solution. I'm not saying that, okay? Because Cody, I'm gonna ask you to come up here. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna have you sit in this seat right here, okay? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is how we need to be our own hero. this around your eyes,
Right?
okay? Can you even see now?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I don't even need this.
Okay. Now that you have that around your eyes, Cody, do you trust me?
No, not really.
Okay, good answer. Okay, so here's the question I need to ask you, and I want everyone to consider if they were sitting in this chair right here, for me to ask them. Cody, do you trust yourself enough that no matter what happens with that blindfold on, once you take it off, you will be able to handle anything that is handed to you, or whatever happens after? Do you trust yourself enough?
Kinda.
So that's maybe a 51-49.
Yeah, right around there.
All right. Okay, go ahead and take that off. Okay, you can go ahead and sit down. The reason I want to do that, thank you, Cody. The reason I want to do that is because of the fact that I heard something the other day. I've heard several things that help us to understand this, okay? When we have an experience, whether it is a known experience or an unknown experience, okay? A known experience would be things like riding a bike, okay? Or something that happens where we have skills to handle it. Whether we have our talents, our gifts, muscle memory. So it's like, you know, as we play football, as we play basketball. I remember I played a lot of baseball, and I remember Bailand was doing something at a friend's house, and I dropped him off, and I stopped by the church house, the North Stake Center. And I went out there, and I played a lot of third base. And I drew the line, so I was taught, that's my responsibility. And I get down, and all of a sudden I feel myself start swaying back and forth, all this muscle memory. And it had been years since I played. And I'm like, I love this. Okay? Now, there are so many things that in our lives we can use our skills. We can use our talents. We can use the gifts that we have. Maybe we don't know we have them. Maybe it's just something that we take for granted. Okay? But what happens when we have an unknown experience? What happens when something is handed to us that we have no idea what to do with it or how to deal with it at all? The beautiful part is that we have more to use in an unknown experience than we do a known experience. Where did I go?
He had to go.
You okay? Okay. We have much more to deal with something in an unknown experience, and here's why. Because we have to use our attributes. We have to use the virtues that are inside of us. We have to use the things that we don't see, that are more intangible and invisible, that we have to wake up. Okay? For example, the virtues that are inside each one of us. I love, these are superpowers. This is what makes us a superhero. Okay? And the reason is because the word arete, that's a Greek word for virtue. So if we look at the definition of virtue in English, it means excellence. That's pretty broad, okay? If we use the word arete, which is the Greek definition, or the Greek word, the English definition, instead of going through the Greek letters and all of that, it means, in the plural form, a manifestation of power or a mighty deed. So, if we are have a superpower that we do not have a limit on. We don't know what our capacity is for that superpower until we have the opportunity to use it, right? And if somebody says, I'm not patient, this is my favorite answer. Well, let's go over to the grocery store, we'll find the oldest, slowest person, and we're gonna walk behind them. And you will be patient, all of a sudden compassion and kindness and tolerance and acceptance and love, they all wake up. It's like empathy, it's a doorway to more, right? So if we understand what our superpowers are, if we can define ourselves by those as opposed to what our job is, what our name is, our last name, what our occupation is, what our hobbies are, what our goods, our bads, our rights, our wrongs, what all the experiences that people label us for. If we can understand that the virtues that will never go away and they're an eternal principle, they will absolutely help us to become who we truly are. Okay? Now, if we look at, we focused in a little bit on grief. Grief is what is on the inside. It's not our actions, it's that pit in our stomach that will not go away if we don't know how to deal with it. Okay? So how do we go from grief, at whatever level it is, how do we get over to happiness? And are we okay being happy? Is it okay for me to be happy after going through such a traumatic experience? Is it okay for me to smile and be happy? It absolutely is. Okay? So, I love this quote. Aristotle said that happiness is the realization and perfect exercise of virtue. What virtue? All of them. How do we know which one to use? Depends on your situation. Depends on where you're at. It depends on what somebody says or what somebody does. But here's how we can become our number one hero. We have to be our own hero, and here's how. We don't trust. You cannot trust that someone will not betray you. You cannot trust that things will always go right. The reason I asked Cody, do you trust that everything will be okay once your blindfold is off? And I wasn't able to get the snake and the tiger and all of that stuff, so you're lucky, right?
Thank goodness.
We have to trust ourselves that no matter what happens, we will be able to handle it. We will be able to do what it takes to stand up and say, okay, I'm all right. My two biggest fears in life, getting a divorce and losing a child, have already happened. All of a sudden, I may be free, but it depends on what happens up here in my mind, what I allow myself to do and feel and think. So we have to ask ourselves, do we trust ourselves enough to be okay if somebody does not live up to the trust that we think that we can feel with them or share with them, right? If we feel betrayed or abandoned or rejected, if we feel anything that is contrary to what we think we should be doing in a relationship or whatever, it has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with us and trusting ourselves that we can be courageous and brave and still kind and compassionate. Okay? When I was putting some things together in regards to how virtue works and how faith works and how love, all of these, faith and love and kindness, they're all virtues. Okay? And I was reading, I don't know how I did it, but I spoke at Bailand's funeral and shared this is where everything began, shared the concept of Bailand offered kindness and compassion, tolerance and acceptance, understanding, all of these beautiful things to others before he was given anything back. That's why we loved him. And that's why we still love him. So we look at the concept of, in the scripture, there's no fear in love. But perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. So let's add, there is no fear, guilt, shame, doubt, any negative thing involved with love or virtue. Because virtue will cast it out. It cannot be in the same room, right? So if we are able to understand that guilt is trying to sneak in, or fear or doubt, we need to understand what it takes for us to trust ourselves enough to be who we truly are. To set up that virtue wall, so to speak, so that those cannot come into our circle. Okay? Grief affects our mind, our spirit, and our body. Okay? In not great ways. Okay? Now, if we look at our mind, the thing we have to look at is we have to trust that there are virtues like wisdom, like justice, like integrity, like humility, that all help us to stay aware, to stay focused, to stay present to where we are, right? And the reason I say it that way is because if we allow these intellectual virtues to do and be what they are, it allows us to still stay authentic. Now, if we look at our spirit, that's more moral virtue. So we have the thoughts of our mind, the thoughts of our heart, which is moral virtue. So if I say somebody hurts my feelings and they're based around intellectual virtue, and I'm a moral virtue person, we're speaking two different languages and we'll never understand each other. Because to the intellectual person, it's just words. It's not just words to the moral person, because their mood is on their heart. They don't understand how to express that language to somebody who has more logic and reason. Okay? So, happiness, Aristotle said, happiness is one with virtue, because virtue in general is the health and beauty and well-being of the soul. Now, I'm excited about this part because this helps me to understand the why. I'm one who is more in my mind more often than I am in my body, okay? And what I mean by that is because the way my mind works, more the intellectual virtue, I can tap into the moral virtue, but I don't know how it affects my body a lot of times, okay? And so when I have conversations with people about depression and anxiety, about PTSD, about addictions, about anger, about different things like that, I finally come to the realization of how our bodies can affect our mind and our spirit as well, okay? Here's how. Not only do we have the virtues that are inside of us that we can wake up, we have to trust that we can use those, but we also have to trust our body that are neurotransmitters such as dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, our endorphins will kick in when we need them, okay? So I love this right here because what it talks about is the different neurotransmitters, okay? But if we have a deficiency in them, how does it affect us? So if we have a deficiency in dopamine, we procrastinate a lot. We have low self-esteem, lack of motivation, low energy, inability to focus, okay? But how is it do we get dopamine? Dopamine deals with motivation, but it gives you a determination to meet a goal, to set a goal and meet it. So how do we approach it? It says here, we can meditate, long-term goals, our diet, if we exercise. So let's look at this. If we look at setting a goal, what virtues would be involved with setting a goal? Determination, hard work, anything in hard work, wisdom, our vision, our creativity, imagination, all of that. So how are we okay? How are we?
She's not feeling very well, so she's
Okay.
gonna have to step out.
So whatever you need to do. Whatever we need to do to wake up the virtues that go along with this. Okay? So even mood swings, if we allow ourselves to be patient, Sam, we'll edit. It's fine. If we allow ourselves to be patient with our during some of these, this is how our chemicals, the chemistry inside our body works. Okay, and this is where I finally understood the whole concept of something called the chemistry of virtue that we'll talk about in just a minute. Okay, so if we look at oxytocin, that's more, they call it the love hormone, which means if we hug somebody, if we're kind, if we go out and do service things for people, we can get a boost of oxytocin, and it makes us feel good, and not just to us. Anybody around can feel that same hormone, that same love hormone, right? Because I love what happens, I love what's going on, and it makes me feel good. Well, guess what? If we do that, it's going to help us so that we don't feel so lonely. We're going to have more energy. We're going to want to go out and do more things like that. We're going to want to continue, even if we just watch. We get the benefits of that neurotransmitter kicking in and saying, that's what it's like. And it's an immediate reaction. It is like an immediate, instant gratification that we can have. It helps us to solve it. It helps us to solve these issues with depression and anxiety. It's already in us. We have virtues. We have these hormones inside of us that if we just turn on and know how to use them, what it takes to kick in, that's a beautiful thing. So, what's our virtue formula? If we're struggling with something, if we don't know what to do about a certain situation, or if we want to become something, if we create a specific virtue formula and allow ourselves to open up to these virtues, it allows us to be authentic and vulnerable to whatever happens in our life, but we can trust ourselves that no matter what happens, we've got this. We have this, right? So this is the chart that I made called the chemistry of virtue. It's based around 10 different, you can see it, 10 different virtues: wisdom, justice, fortitude, self-control, love, attitude, hard work, integrity, gratitude, and humility. Okay? Now, Darren, you asked, when I sent this over to you, you said, I don't even know how this works. What does it do? Okay? Here's how it works. So, if we go back and we say, I need So, for example, we'll say the dopamine, which is setting goals and having a desire to be better, right? If we don't know what we need, we can look at this and we can say, what does it do? What does this chemical do in my body? Okay, whichever one. And then we can come over here and we can say, oh, I need to use a little more wisdom because I need to be creative. I need to have a little more vision. I need to be a little bit more curious and wonder about certain things and ask more questions. So, I need wisdom, but which element of wisdom is going to work best? And what do I have the greatest capacity in to do? And we can do that if we say we need wisdom, but we also need humility or love. We can connect those, and whatever virtue elements we want to use or need to use in there, it allows us to create that formula and be who we are. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to say is this. I opened up by saying that I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name is grief. Grief does a lot of crazy things to us. A lot of crazy things that we don't understand ourselves. Our mind, our body, our spirit, and we wonder why people look at us and say, I don't understand you. You've changed. Why are you doing this? Why are you addicted? What are you looking for? Why are you angry? Help me to understand your depression, your anxiety. Help me to understand some of these things that are going on, in, not just inside of you, but your behavior. For me, the most important thing to ask is not, why are you doing all of this? The most important question is, why does it hurt so bad? The reason that is a vital question is because of the fact that if we understand why the wound hurts, and we can address that, we can heal that wound with virtue. If we understand that, these go away. If we understand that the anger is because not being respected or loved or feeling wanted or needed, if we can understand that we have to trust ourselves to stand up and do these things for ourselves, and we can, then these go away. We understand that this is not as big of a factor as sometimes we make it out to be. I have no idea how I make it day to day. This last Friday was not a fun one. I've had some fun things going on in my family, and I think you all have been out to the reservoir, which my dad lives on. I'm staying out there with him, but I went out to sit on the dock, and most of the time I'll go out there and just listen to the ducks and the geese and watch the sun go down and just enjoy it. Very peaceful out there. Except on Friday night, I went out there and I laid on the dock. And I laid there long enough to stop hurting, for my heart to stop hurting, for me to understand that it's okay to go on, that I have to trust that no matter what happens, I got this. It took a little while. Lots of thoughts in my head. was I was considering was not the same one everybody else looked there for. But it was at that moment when I stood up, realized I didn't want to ring a proverbial bell. I didn't want anybody to tell me it was okay. I didn't want that. And I didn't know why. But I can tell you one thing. That is the moment that I learned that I have to be my own hero. I have to stand up and say, no matter what happens, I will be okay. I don't care what the outcome is. I give up on that because I can't control that. And that's the most beautiful part of this whole entire thing, is if we give up. If we allow whatever's supposed to happen, we can absolutely find happiness in whatever the situation is at any point in our lives. And that's it.
Yeah, there you go.